Playing with Power MTG. Powerful cards, powerful formats. Before we begin tonight's game, I wanted to ask a question. Do you have extra cards lying around that you don't use? Want to buy or trade for some extra cards but don't know how to maximize the value? Then you should try out today's sponsor, Card Conduit. Card Conduit is the best service when it comes to selling your extra cards. Don't waste hours trying to find the best buy list price for your cards online. Simply send them to Card Conduit and let them take care of the rest. I've used Card Conduit multiple times already. I always use them for getting the best value of my extra cards and my extra bulk. I get fair prices for my cards and they save me tons of time. They have three main services. Their standard service lets you send them unsorted cards of any value. They will sort, grade, and give you the best price for your cards, including your bulk. Their curated service is similar. Send them your unsorted cards worth over $1 in value. They will charge half of the fee of standard service and then charge no fee per card. Their new sorted service is a great value as well. Choose cards in advance with their selection tool, send them sorted to Card Conduit, and they will grade and buy list them automatically. Save yourself the time of having to send to multiple sites and let Card Conduit do it instead. Their fee is only 2% with no fee per card. So give Card Conduit a try today. If you sign up with my link in the description below or use the promo code POWER, you will also get 10% off of their fees when you use their service. A big thanks to Card Conduit for sponsoring today's video. Now, let's start out by showcasing our fighters this evening. First, we have Dawn, piloting the partner pair of Tymna the Weaver and Thrasios Triton Hero. This is a mid-range deck that seeks to reanimate Rograkh the Foul-Blooded to combo off and win. Dawn's opening hand contains a Soul Ring, Mystical Tutor, Deathrite Shaman, Diabolic Intent, Morphic Pool, Mana Confluence, and a Bloodstained Mire. Next, we have Drake, piloting the partner pair of Rograkh, Son of Rograkh, and Silas Wrenn, Seeker Adept. This is a turbo ad nauseum list considered to be one of the fastest in the format. It looks to resolve ad nauseum and win with Underworld Breach and Thoracle lines. Drake's opening hand contains a Gemstone Mine, Steam Vents, Command Tower, Mox Opal, Wishclaw Talisman, Deadly Rollick, and a Dockside Extortionist. After that, we have our Mox Pearl patron Sean, piloting the partner pair of Tymna the Weaver and Kraum, Ludovic's Opus. This is a mid-range ad nauseum deck that seeks to grind value with its commanders before going for a Breach or Thoracle win. Sean's opening hand contains an Imperial Seal, Rite of Flame, Spire of Industry, Mana Vault, Demonic Tutor, Verdant Catacombs, and a Snapback. Finally, we have our Mox Pearl patron Charles, piloting Owl the Dawn Sky. This is a mid-range deck that plays light stacks before executing a combo to loop through its deck using its commander. Charles' opening hand contains an Esper Sentinel, Ambitious Farmhand, Nykthos Shrine to Nyx, and 4 snow-covered plains. Without further ado, let's kick off this adorable adolescent admiring adoption. Dawn had the fastest time in the Elden Ring speedrun and gets to start us off. Dawn draws a card for turn and plays a Morphic Pool. He casts a Soul Ring and passes the turn. Drake draws a card for turn and plays a Command Tower. He casts his commander, Rograkh, Son of Rograkh. He casts a Mox Opal. Drake passes. Sean draws and plays a Verdant Catacombs. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up an Underground Sea onto the battlefield. He casts Imperial Seal. He fetches up a card onto the top of his library and loses 2 life. Sean ends his turn. Charles draws and plays a Snow-Covered Plains. He casts Esper Sentinel. He ships the turn to Dawn. Dawn draws and plays a Mana Confluence. He casts a Deathrite Shaman. Dawn passes. Drake draws and plays a Gemstone Mine. He casts Wishclaw Talisman. Esper triggers and Charles draws. Drake ends his turn. Sean draws and plays a Spire of Industry. He casts a Mana Crypt. Esper triggers and Charles draws. He taps his Spire of Industry to cast Rite of Flame, adding 2 red. He casts his commander, Kraum, Ludovic's Opus. He moves to combat and attacks Drake with Kraum. Drake takes it and Sean passes the turn. Charles draws and plays a Snow-Covered Plains. He moves to combat and attacks Drake with Esper Sentinel. Drake takes it, and in his second main phase, Charles casts Sanctifier Invac. It enters and exiles all black and red cards from all graveyards. Charles passes. At the end of Charles' turn, Dawn taps his Mana Confluence to cast Mystical Tutor. Esper triggers and Dawn draws. He fetches up a Force of Will onto the top of his library and moves to his turn. Dawn draws, plays a Bloodstained Mire, and passes. Drake draws and plays a Brainstorm. Esper triggers and Charles draws. Then Drake draws 3 and puts 2 back on top. He plays a City of Traders for turn. He casts Dockside Extortionist. Kraum triggers and Sean draws. In response, Dawn cracks his Bloodstained Mire, pays a life, and fetches up a Scrubland onto the battlefield. Dawn then taps his Mana Confluence to hard cast Force of Will, targeting Dockside. Esper triggers and Dawn activates Deathrite Shaman, exiling a land from his graveyard to pay for it. In response, Drake casts a Force of Will of his own, paying a life and exiling a blue card, countering Dawn's Force of Will. Then Dockside resolves and Drake creates 3 treasures. He activates Wishclaw Talisman, fetching up a card into his hand and giving Wishclaw to Dawn. He casts Necropotence. He casts Deadly Rollick for its alternate cost, exiling Sean's Kraum. He activates Necropotence 15 times, paying 15 life and exiling 15 cards. He moves to his end step and puts the Necro cards into his hand. He passes, discarding to hand size, exiling the discarded cards. During his upkeep, Sean wins his mana crypt roll. He draws and plays a scrubland. He casts a mana vault. Esper triggers and Charles draws. He casts a demonic tutor. He fetches up a card into his hand and passes to Charles. Charles draws and plays a snow-covered plains. He moves to combat and attacks Drake with Sanctifier Inbeck and Dawn with Esper Sentinel. They both take it, and in his second main phase, Charles casts Land Tax. He casts a Salvage Scout. Charles gives the turn to Dawn. Dawn draws and plays an Overgrown Tomb into play untapped, paying 2 life. He casts his commander, Thrasios, Triton Hero. He moves to combat and attacks Sean with Deathrite. Sean takes it, and Dawn ends his turn. Drake skips his draw step due to Necropotence. He casts Snap, targeting his dockside. Esper triggers and Charles draws. In response, Dawn taps his Mana Confluence to cast Assassin's Trophy, targeting dockside. Esper triggers and Charles draws again. Dockside is destroyed and Drake searches his library for a basic land, failing to find. Then Snap fizzles. Next, Drake casts Dark Ritual. In response, Sean taps his Spire of Industry to help cast Ad Nauseam. Esper triggers and Charles draws. Ad Naus resolves and Sean reveals a Flusterstorm, Windswept Teeth, Steam Vents, Demonic Consultation, Culling the Weak, Serra Ascendant, Volcanic Island, Mental Misstep, Tainted Pact, Deflecting Swat, Jessica's Will, Gemstone Caverns, Soul Ring, Marsh Flats, Dockside Extortionist, Luxury Suite, Simian Spirit Guide, Mox Diamond, Lion's Eye Diamond, Mystic Remora, Polluted Delta, Ledger Shredder, Underworld Breach, and a Force of Negation, deciding to stop there. Still in response to Dark Ritual, Sean casts Force of Negation, exiling a blue card, countering and exiling Dark Ritual. Next, Drake casts Demonic Tutor. He fetches up a card into his hand. He casts Mox Amber. He activates Necropotence 16 times, paying 16 life and exiling 16 cards. He moves to his end step and puts the Necro cards into his hand. He passes, discarding to hand size, exiling the discarded cards. During his upkeep, Sean wins his Mana Crypt roll. During his draw step, he takes a damage from his Mana Vault. He plays a Volcanic Island for turn. He casts Mox Diamond, paying the Esper tax. It resolves, and Sean discards Gemstone Caverns. He exiles Simian Spirit Guide from his hand, adding a red. He casts Dockside Extortionist. It enters, and Sean creates 7 treasures. He casts Snapback for its alternate cost, exiling a blue card, bouncing Dockside back to his hand. He recasts Dockside, creating 7 more treasures. He casts Ranger Captain of Eos. It resolves, and with the trigger on the stack, Sean sacrifices Ranger Captain, locking out opponents this turn. He then fetches up an Esper Sentinel into his hand. He casts Tainted Pact. Pact resolves, and he exiles from the top of his library until he finds Thassa's Oracle and puts it into his hand. He casts Thassa's Oracle. It enters, and with a trigger on the stack, he casts Demonic Consultation, exiling his library. Oracle's trigger resolves, and Sean wins the game. What a fun game. Let's do another one. In this game, Charles brings back Owl, the Dawn Sky, and his opening hand contains the Snow-Covered Plains, Urza Saga, Inventor's Fair, Oswald Fiddlebender, Silence, Mirage Mirror, and a Recruiter of the Guard. Sean brings back Tymna the Weaver and Kraum Ludovic's Opus, and his opening hand contains a Deflecting Swat, Wheel of Fortune, Talisman of Progress, Gemstone Caverns, Misty Rainforest, Windswept Teeth, and his London Mulligan is an Underworld Breach. Drake brings back Rograkh, Son of Rograkh, and Silas Wren, Seeker Adept, and his opening hand contains a Mental Misstep, Soul Ring, Snap, Phyrexian Tower, Luxury Suite, Gamble, and a Mystic Remora. Dawn brings back Tymna the Weaver and Thrasios, Triton Hero, and his opening hand contains a March of Swirling Mist, Survival of the Fittest, Spellseeker, Dance of the Dead, Polluted Delta, Enlightened Tutor, and a Hallowed Fountain. And Charles gets to start us off. But Sean has a pre-game action and puts Gemstone Caverns onto the battlefield, exiling Windswept Teeth. Charles draws, plays a Snow-Covered Plains, and passes. Sean draws and plays a Misty Rainforest. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up an Underground Sea onto the battlefield. He casts an Imperial Seal. He fetches up a card onto the top of his library and loses 2 life. The table feels major deja vu as Sean ends his turn. Drake draws and plays a City of Brass. He taps a City of Brass to cast Mystic Remora. He casts his commander, Rograkh, Son of Rograkh. Drake passes. Dawn draws and plays a Hallowed Fountain into play untapped, paying 2 life. He casts an Enlightened Tutor. Remora triggers and Drake draws. Dawn then fetches up a Mana Crypt onto the top of his library. Dawn passes. Charles draws and plays an Urza Saga, getting its first counter. He casts Oswald Fiddlebender. Charles gives the turn to Sean. Sean draws and casts a Mana Crypt. Remora triggers and Drake draws. He casts a Wheel of Fortune. Remora triggers and Drake draws again. Then everyone discards their hands and draws 7. He plays an Exotic Orchard and ships the turn to Drake. During his upkeep, Drake taps his City of Brass to pay for his Remora. He draws and plays a Mana Confluence. He taps his Confluence to cast Culling the Weak, sacrificing Rograkh as an additional cost. In response, Sean casts Dispel. Remora triggers and Drake draws. Dispel counters Culling the Weak, and Drake gives the turn to Dawn. Dawn draws and plays an Exotic Orchard. He casts out Mana Crypt. Remora triggers and Drake draws. He casts a Rhystic Study. Remora triggers and Drake draws again. Dawn ends his turn. Charles draws, and in his first main phase, Urza Saga gets another counter. He plays a Snow-Covered Plains. He casts Temporary Lockdown. Rhystic and Mystic trigger, and Dawn and Drake draw. It enters and exiles all non-land permanents mana value 2 or less. Charles casts on Mana Crypt. Rhystic triggers, and Dawn draws. He casts a Soul Ring, paying the Rhystic tax this time. All through, Charles passes. Sean draws and plays a Command Tower. He casts his commander, Tymna the Weaver, paying the Rhystic tax. Sean passes. Drake draws and plays an Underground Sea. He taps his Mana Confluence to help cast Cabal Ritual with Threshold. Dawn draws from Rhystic, and Drake adds 5 black. He casts a Mana Vault, paying the Rhystic tax. He casts Ad Nauseam. Rhystic triggers, and Dawn draws. In response, Dawn casts what he has, which is a Spell Pierce. It resolves, and Drake pays 2. Then Ad Naus resolves. Drake reveals a Gemstone Mine, Watery Grave, Misty Rainforest, Simian Spirit Guide, Mox Opal, Wheel of Misfortune, Demonic Consultation, Kraum Mox, Daze, Burgi God of Storytelling, Marsh Flats, Yawgmoth's Will, Grim Tutor, Arcane Signet, Imperial Seal, Fierce Guardianship, Dramatic Reversal, Swan Song, Bloodstained Mire, Flusterstorm, Dispel, and a Gitaxian Probe, deciding to stop there. He casts Chrome Mox, Imprinting Dispel, and Dawn draws from Rhystic. He casts Chain of Vapor, targeting his Mana Vault. Dawn draws from Rhystic, and Chain resolves. Drake bounces Mana Vault and sacks a land, continuing the chain, targeting Rhystic Study. Rhystic bounces, and Dawn stops the chain. Drake casts Mox Opal. He exiles Simian Spirit Guide from his hand, adding a red. He casts Rite of Flame, adding 2 red. He recasts Mana Vault. He casts Arcane Signet. He casts Dramatic Reversal, untapping his non-land permanents. He recasts his commander, Rograkh, son of Rograkh. He casts Thassa's Oracle. Oracle enters, and with the trigger on the stack, Drake casts Demonic Consultation, exiling his library. Oracle's trigger resolves, and Drake wins the game. Ladies and gentlemen, what a fun set of games tonight. Congrats to Sean and Drake on their wins. Each player proved once again that 3 and 4 color Ad Nauseam decks win quickly and consistently. In Game 1, Sean looked to resolve his Ad Nauseam before Drake could resolve his. He did it with his Dark Ritual on the stack and then countered it to stop Drake in his tracks. In Game 2, Drake leveraged his early Mystic Remora to draw into the interaction he needed. Even after his Culling the Weak was countered, he bounced back and closed out the game. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more like this, be sure to subscribe. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Tune in next time and we duke it out to see who will be king of the competitive EDH table. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.